Good evening and welcome to the Sleep to Lore series. Tonight we'll talk about Dungeon Crawler Carl Book 1, a chaotic lit RPG adventure where the apocalypse is a televised game show and the only survivors are a man without pants and his ex-girlfriend's prize-winning cat. If you'd like, subscribe or comment to help the channel grow. Before we begin, I have a question for you. If the world ended today and you had to choose one pet to fight by your side in a dungeon, what animal would you choose and why? Comment below with your choice. Now, let's transition to the story. The world collapses in an instant, buildings flattening into the earth like pancakes, leaving only a few survivors to enter the subterranean labyrinth known as the World Dungeon, the bureaucracy of extinction. In the quiet, freezing depths of a January night, the world ended not with a dramatic, fiery apocalypse, but with a sudden bureaucratic keystroke. It was a Tuesday. A bitter winter storm had locked North America in its icy grip. In Seattle, the temperature had plummeted well below freezing, an anomaly that sent most of the city's inhabitants deep into their warm, sheltered beds. This instinct for comfort, this fundamental human drive to seek a roof against the cold, became the very instrument of their immediate eradication. At exactly 23 minutes past 2 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time, an unfathomable cosmic event simply flattened everything with an interior. Apartments, cars, tents, subway stations. If it possessed a roof, it was instantaneously crushed into cosmic dust, taking everyone inside along with it. We find our focal point in a man named Carl, a 27-year-old former Coast Guardsman turned marine technician who survives simply because he is standing outside in the unforgiving cold. He is entirely unprepared for the end of the world. Clad only in his boxers, a heavy leather jacket, and a pair of his ex-girlfriend's undersized pink rubber clogs, Carl is outside chasing a notoriously stubborn, flat-faced Persian showcat. This feline, Princess Donut the Queen Anne Chonk, belongs to the very same ex-girlfriend who had recently shattered their relationship with a betrayal in the Bahamas. Carl's survival is not a product of destiny or heroism. It is a profound accident of domestic frustration. As the colossal, multi-story apartment building before him compresses into a flattened rectangle of churned dirt with a deafening slam, the psychological shock is absolute. The city is gone. The streetlights are extinguished. Where a metropolis once thrived, only scattered trees and naked earth remain, illuminated occasionally by distant, raging fires. The sheer scale of the death toll is something the human mind is ill-equipped to process. Billions extinguished in a heartbeat. As Carl stands amidst the wreckage, an alien presence invades his mind. A robotic, disembodied voice accompanied by floating, glowing text that his brain magically translates, delivers a sterile eviction notice for humanity. The planet Earth, the voice drones, has defaulted on a galactic mineral rights claim it never knew existed. An unfathomably massive interstellar conglomerate known as the Syndicate, utilizing the Borant Corporation as its planetary regent, has reclaimed the world to strip mine its elemental resources. To comply with some twisted intergalactic Indigenous Species Protection Act, the microscopic fraction of surviving humanity is offered a sadistic choice. They may remain on the frozen, barren surface to starve, or they may enter the newly constructed, 18-tiered subterranean world dungeon. Inside, they will become crawlers, participants in a planetary reclamation process that is, in reality, a blood-soaked spectacle designed for the universe's entertainment. With freezing winds threatening to claim his limbs and blinding spotlights bursting from the earth to reveal massive, ornate stairwells plunging into the warm depths below, Carl makes the only choice a living creature can make. Clutching the squirming showcat to his chest, he steps out of the freezing ruins of human history and descends into the light. The descent and the architect's mockery. The transition from the icy remnants of Seattle to the cavernous depths of the first floor is a sensory shock. The stairwell, carved from dark, wrought iron and etched with unsettling demonic fish motifs, plunges relentlessly downward. The air grows thick, balmy, and suffocatingly warm. As Carl reaches the bottom, he is met by towering wooden double doors, an entrance designed to make any mortal feel profoundly insignificant. Here, the architectural grandiosity of the dungeon serves a dual purpose. It is both a prison and a stage. The moment the massive doors slam shut behind him, sealing away the surface world forever, the true nature of this nightmare begins to reveal itself. It is a gamified hell. A new, overly enthusiastic voice, sickeningly reminiscent of a daytime game show host, echoes in Carl's mind. Translucent blue interfaces materialize in his peripheral vision, a persistent augmented reality that he can manipulate with mere thought. The system assigns him a numerical designation, a race, and a level. It categorizes his very existence into a series of statistics. Princess Donut, scratching at the humid air, is similarly tagged and processed by the cold logic of the system. Yet, it is the notifications that inflict the deepest psychological cut. The dungeon's artificial intelligence possesses a distinct mocking personality. It awards him achievements that read like cruel jokes. He is praised for bringing a cat into a death trap, ridiculed for arriving without pants, and mocked for having absolutely no weapons or survival gear. The system anticipates his gruesome demise and finds it hilarious. It is a masterclass in psychological degradation, designed to strip away the dignity of the surviving humans before the monsters even touch them. Fleeing down the massive, dimly lit stone corridors, Carl encounters his first native horrors. A roaring, steam-powered mechanical monstrosity, a murder dozer cobbled together from rusted metal and adorned with spinning spikes, barrels down an intersecting hallway. It is piloted by an incel goblin engineer wielding a pot for a helmet, accompanied by two screeching green-skinned underlings. The absurdity of the threat does not lessen its lethal intent. Carl is thrust from a mundane life of repairing electrical systems on party boats into a desperate sprint for his life, his undersized pink clogs slapping against the cold dungeon tiles. His only hope lies in a faintly glowing neon sign pointing down a narrow alley advertising a tutorial guild. It is an oasis of knowledge in a desert of mechanized slaughter, blood on the tiles and the Ratmaster's truth. Survival in the world dungeon demands the immediate abandonment of civilized hesitation. Reaching the heavy wooden door of the tutorial guild, Carl finds it locked. The guildmaster inside refuses entry while hostile creatures are in proximity. Trapped between an impenetrable door and a heavy spiked machine churning its way around the corridor's bend, Carl is forced into a brutal paradigm shift. The two goblin foot soldiers dismount, wielding rudimentary clubs topped with pineapples, a darkly comedic touch that contrasts sharply with the lethal force they intend to use. Carl is not a trained assassin, but his military background instills a crucial instinct: violence of action. When the first goblin swings, Carl steps inside the arc and unleashes a barrage of bare-knuckle strikes, shattering the creature's face. The physical sensation of bone giving way beneath his fists, paired with the sudden materialization of a hovering, depleting health bar over the goblin's head, creates a profound cognitive dissonance. He is committing visceral, bloody murder, yet the world insists it is merely a game mechanic. When the dozer finally approaches, Carl embraces the insanity. He scales the bone ladder of the bucking machine, hurls the remaining foot soldier into the spinning blades, and faces the engineer. With a desperate leap from the heights of the machine, Carl uses his sheer physical mass to crush the goblin beneath his bare feet. The biological devastation is absolute, an act of brutal intimacy that leaves Carl coated in gore. A looming boiler breach on the damaged machine forces him to dive into the now unlocked guild room, just as the corridor erupts in a concussive shockwave of steam and shrapnel. Inside the safe zone, the adrenaline recedes, leaving a cold, trembling realization. He is greeted by Mordecai, a level 50 non-combatant NPC currently assuming the form of a bipedal, rat-like humanoid dressed in a vest. Mordecai is a changeling, a veteran of countless planetary purges, indentured to the system until he finishes his final tour of duty. Through Mordecai, the true, horrifying scope of the cosmos is unveiled. Earth is not merely being mined. Its destruction is the backdrop for a galactic reality television show. The Crawl is broadcast to quintillions of viewers across billions of star systems. Humanity's final desperate struggle for survival is nothing more than seasonal entertainment for an apathetic, highly advanced universe. This psychological insight shatters Carl. The cosmic horror is not the existence of monsters, but the complete and utter commodification of human suffering. To survive, Carl learns, he cannot simply fight. He must perform. He must become a spectacle. The architecture of spectacle and the spoils of war. Within the quiet, rustic confines of the Tutorial Guild, Mordecai guides Carl through the esoteric interface of his own altered consciousness. The system operates on a dimensional inventory, allowing items to be stored in an ethereal pocket space. A necessary evolution, Mordecai explains, because watching desperate humans slowly starve to death in previous iterations of the broadcast resulted in poor viewer retention. Every rule of this universe is dictated by audience engagement. As Carl navigates his menus, he confronts his own quantified essence. His physical attributes are translated into numerical values. A strength of 6 suggests a formidable physical presence, a remnant of his muscular build and military discipline. However, an intelligence score of 3 stings his pride. It is a brutal, objective assessment by an alien intelligence that categorizes his practical, hands-on intellect as fundamentally rudimentary. Yet Mordecai advises that wisdom and sheer willpower are hidden variables, the unquantifiable human elements that often dictate survival more than raw intellect. The most terrifying menu, however, is the Ratings tab: views, followers, favorites, and patrons. Mordecai imparts a grim truth. The dungeon is designed to be mathematically impossible to conquer alone. Survival requires external intervention in the form of benefactor boxes, loot sent by wealthy intergalactic viewers and corporate sponsors. To attract these sponsors, a crawler must possess an indefinable charisma, an it factor. They must slaughter with style. They must utter catchphrases. They must court the gaze of the very beings who are casually watching their civilization be reduced to ash. It is a profoundly dystopian ecosystem where one's continued respiration is entirely dependent on their marketability. The tutorial progresses to the spoils of Carl's initial violent triumphs. An array of loot boxes materializes in the air, ranging from humble bronze to gleaming silver and gold. The rewards within are a bizarre juxtaposition of high fantasy and junkyard reality. A simplistic wooden toad cudgel and an iron fireplace poker serve as his primary armaments. A silver goblin box yields sticks of dynamite and a mystical brand that sears a goblin skull into the flesh of his forearm, granting him passive passage through certain enemy territories at the cost of drawing the ire of others. But the true treasures lie in the golden chests. He receives an enchanted night-gaunt cloak of stoutness, a leathery winged garment that fortifies his constitution and guards against the dungeon's elemental extremes. Beneath it, he dons an enchanted trollskin shirt of pummeling, a surprisingly stylish garment that grants him rapid, cellular regeneration. Lastly, an enchanted toe ring of the splatter skunk slides onto his bloodied foot, amplifying his unarmed combat prowess to superhuman levels. Dressed in his boxers, an ex-girlfriend's pink clogs, a demonic cloak, and a trollskin shirt, Carl becomes a walking contradiction. He is simultaneously heavily armored and laughably exposed, a visual metaphor for humanity's current state, powerful yet deeply vulnerable, the ascension of the Queen Anne chonk. While Carl acclimates to his newfound superhuman physiology, The most profound metamorphosis occurs in the corner of the room, involving a creature that has no concept of galactic economics or digital inventories. Princess Donut, the pampered, temperamental Persian showcat, had received her own accolades from the system simply by surviving the initial descent. Among her spoils is a legendary quadruped box, an extreme rarity granted for being the very first feline to enter this iteration of the world dungeon. From this chest emerges an enhanced pet biscuit. Mordecai issues a grave warning regarding its consumption, detailing a volatile list of potential side effects that range from wondrous augmentation to horrific, flesh-warping mutations. Left with little choice, Carl offers the morsel to the cat. The reaction is instantaneous and deeply unsettling. The pristine, fuzzy feline collapses into a quivering, gelatinous puddle of biological matter. The system designates this horrific state as a transformation. For several agonizing minutes, Carl watches the pulsing mound of organic slurry, wrestling with the guilt of potentially having killed the last living connection to his previous life. When the transformation concludes, the entity that emerges is physically indistinguishable from the cat that dissolved. She is still a fluffy, flat-faced Persian. However, the psychological and existential reality of Princess Donut has been irrevocably shattered and rebuilt. She turns her gaze upon Carl, and an imperious, decidedly human female voice echoes in his mind. The pet has awakened. The system's translation matrix allows them to communicate, revealing a mind that is staggeringly complex. A glance at her newly generated party stats leaves Carl in stunned silence. While Carl possesses an intelligence of 3 and a charisma of 4, Donut boasts an intelligence of 11 and an astronomical charisma of 25. The pampered showcat, accustomed to the adoration of judges and the finest wet food, has been recognized by the alien system as an entity of supreme social dominance. Her first act as a fully sentient crawler is to demand respect, insisting on her full, absurdly long registered show name before settling on Princess Donut for informal settings. She immediately relegates Carl from his presumed role as her master to the position of her royal bodyguard. The power dynamic of their relationship flips entirely. She is no longer a liability to be protected. With an innate capacity for arcane arts, she effortlessly learns the magic missile spell from a tome within her own inventory. Yet, her newfound agency comes with terrifying consequences. From her legendary loot pool, she gleefully equips a dark, swirling tiara known as the Enchanted Crown of the Sepsis Whore. Because she is a quadruped with a mental interface, she bypasses Carl's ability to stop her. The item is cursed. By placing it upon her furry head, Princess Donut is permanently inducted into the royal line of succession of the Blood Sultanate, a faction residing deep on the dungeon's 9th floor. The system's rules are uncompromising. To descend past that floor, she will have to slaughter every member of her new, adoptive royal family. As the fluffy, tiara-wearing cat confidently approaches the heavy oak door to exit the safe zone, commanding it to open, Carl is left staring at the surreal reality of his existence. He is a half-naked brawler armed with a stick, magically bound in servitude to an egomaniacal, hyper-intelligent cat who has just inadvertently declared a blood feud on an entire floor of an alien labyrinth. Together, the royal court of Princess Donut steps out of the sanctuary and back into the dark, watching corridors of the world dungeon. The 5-day countdown timer ticks mercilessly downward. The cameras of a billion worlds are waiting, and the descent has only just begun. The weight of the descent. The heavy, unyielding door of the tutorial guild slammed shut, severing the final thread of safety Carl and his feline companion possessed. In the quiet gloom of the subterranean corridor, a holographic timer pulsed with a sterile, uncaring luminescence, declaring that the floor would completely collapse into nothingness in exactly 4 days and 20 hours. Carl stood frozen for a fraction of a second, his mind reeling from the enigmatic parting words of their guide. The wizened creature had looked at Carl with a profound, weary sorrow, warning him that survival was a hollow victory, that the true nightmare would not abate until the 12th floor, and that negotiation was the only shield against the absolute cruelty of the universe. It was a terrifying psychological burden to place on a man who had barely survived the first hours of the apocalypse. It implied that the horror surrounding them was not merely a gauntlet of monsters, but an intricate bureaucratic machine designed to grind their souls into dust. Beside him, Princess Donut, a former showcat currently coming to terms with her newfound sapience, immediately shattered the grim silence by demanding protection and, rather absurdly, insisting that Carl find some pants. The juxtaposition of their apocalyptic reality with the mundane vanity of a pageant pet would have been comical if it weren't so deeply tragic. Yet, as they ventured into the featureless, scorched hallways, an unexpected moment of profound vulnerability emerged. Donut, shedding her haughty aristocratic persona, confessed her fear. She articulated a sudden, sharp self-awareness, looking back at her life as a pampered pet through the lens of human cognition. She realized that despite her royal pedigree, the quiet moments spent sitting on Carl's lap while he played video games were the truest comforts she had known. This confession fundamentally shifted their dynamic. They were no longer a man dragging his ex-girlfriend's cat through a disaster zone. They were two displaced souls clinging to each other in the dark, forging a symbiotic partnership born of sheer terror and mutual reliance. Their precarious emotional truce was abruptly shattered by the violent reality of the dungeon. Lurking in a pitch-black alleyway was a creature the system designated as a bad llama. The encounter was a masterclass in the Syndicate's perverse sense of humor. Here was a gargantuan, gangly camelid, exuding the menacing aura of a hardened street thug, complete with a terrifying biological weapon. It spat molten lava. When Donut exhausted her meager magical reserves after blinding the beast with energy projectiles, Carl was forced into brutal close-quarters combat. The psychological barrier of striking a living creature with his bare hands vanished under the immediate threat of incineration. Carl drove his fists into the creature's glowing throat, feeling the sickening, wet crunch of bone beneath his knuckles. The intense agony of his own fractured hand was almost immediately erased by the system's unnatural regeneration mechanics. This instantaneous healing was a psychological violation in itself, commodifying Carl's physical trauma, turning his pain into a mere mathematical subtraction that could be easily refilled. The sheer absurdity reached its zenith when the massive creature succumbed, leaving behind stakes, a pelt, and impossibly small baggies of crystalline narcotics. The universe was not just trying to kill them, it was actively mocking them. Navigating deeper into the bioluminescent green glow of the labyrinth, the environment itself seemed designed to unnerve. They encountered an endless sequence of disjointed doors pulled directly from Earth's surface, each opening into a claustrophobic, identical bathroom stall. It was a psychological torture tactic, offering a slice of the familiar mundane world, only to twist it into a surreal, inescapable loop. As they fought off swarms of aggressive, oversized rodents and grotesque cockroaches, Carl experienced the deeply unsettling nature of the system's artificial intelligence. Upon leveling up his unarmed combat skills, the disembodied voice in his head adopted an intimately breathy, disturbing tone, romanticizing the act of crushing life beneath his bare feet. It was a stark reminder that they were not merely fighting for survival. They were performing for an audience, monitored by entities that found erotic amusement in their desperate violence. Finally, after hours of exhausting visceral combat, the glowing beacon of a sanctuary appeared on their mental map, promising a momentary reprieve from the relentless psychological grind. Squalor and spectacle. Stepping into the designated safe room was a jarring transition from gothic horror to sterile surrealism. Instead of a fortified bunker, Carl and Donut found themselves standing in an immaculately preserved off-brand fast food restaurant playground, complete with colourful plastic tubes and a ball pit. This bizarrely cheerful environment, ripped from the innocence of Earth's childhoods, was brutally undercut by the massive digital screens hanging above the ordering counter. The primary screen displayed a relentlessly ticking counter of the remaining human population. It hovered just above 4 million. In the span of a few hours, billions had been eradicated. Carl stared at the numbers, his mind fundamentally incapable of processing the sheer volume of genocide. The abstraction of the digits offered a cold, numerical summary of an extinction event, leaving him with a hollow, sickening ache in his chest. Their host in this purgatorial McDonald's was Tally, a diminutive, moss-scented creature trapped in eternal servitude as the room's caretaker. Tally's existence was a chilling preview of the dungeon's endless cycle, an NPC bound to cater to the whims of doomed mortals while remaining entirely apathetic to their plight. Yet, despite the apocalyptic context, the psychological comfort of a hot meal could not be denied. Tally served a spectacularly rich Indian curry, and for a fleeting moment, as the spices warmed his exhausted body, Carl allowed himself to forget the end of the world. He slept in a cramped hotel-style closet within the restaurant, achieving a deep, dreamless coma born of sheer physical and emotional depletion. When he awoke, cleansed and fed, the reality of his situation crashed back down. The countdown had marched forward. Humanity was still bleeding out. Driven by the frantic need to level up before the floor's collapse, they ventured back into the green-lit corridors to hunt the massive insectoids known as scatterers. The combat had become a macabre routine of stomping and crushing, Carl's feet growing unnaturally calloused to the sharp, chitinous armor of his foes. Their hunt led them to an imposing, barricaded door bearing a weathered Spanish health warning. The air grew thick with tension. Behind this door lay a neighborhood boss, a creature of significant power. Opting for a pragmatic, ruthless approach, Carl ignited a stick of highly volatile goblin dynamite, hurling it into the darkness before sealing the entrance. The resulting concussive blast shattered the door and sent Carl flying, his ears ringing and his vision swimming in red warnings. When the smoke cleared, the true horror of the dungeon's design was unveiled. The boss was not a monstrous alien beast, but a colossal, tragically mutated human woman. Imprisoned in a mountain of burning refuse, her flesh was marred by burns and sores, her mind fractured by the trauma of her transformation. She towered 15 feet high, a grotesque parody of humanity, weeping and pleading in Spanish for Jesus to save her. Carl's heart plummeted into his stomach. This was the most insidious psychological torment the Syndicate could devise. They had taken a frightened, vulnerable woman from Earth, warped her into a boss monster, and programmed her to regurgitate swarms of killer cockroaches. She was terrified, disoriented, and fundamentally innocent. Yet, she was a lethal threat. The battle that ensued was not a heroic clash of champions, but an agonizing, desperate execution. As the woman staggered, vomiting giant insects that tore at Carl's flesh, the primal instinct to survive overrode his moral revulsion. He scrambled up a mountain of rancid garbage, the stench of burning plastic and rotting meat filling his lungs, and wrapped a discarded steel dog leash around her massive throat. The violence was horrifyingly intimate. Carl felt the vibrations of her gurgling pleas through the metal chain as he dragged her down. When the chain snapped, he was forced to pummel her face with his bare fists. With every strike, he felt the fragile architecture of her facial bones giving way like wet clay under his knuckles. Her final words, a tearful apology and a plea to be released from hell, echoed in Carl's mind long after her body went limp. The system's boisterous, triumphant fanfare erupted, celebrating the murder, an utterly sickening contrast to the profound tragedy of what had just occurred. Carl leaned against the deceased woman's colossal corpse, fighting the urge to empty his stomach, deeply traumatized by the monstrous act survival required. The galactic abattoir. Seeking clarity amidst the moral murk, Carl and Donut retreated to consult their guide, Mordecai, learning the complex bureaucratic hierarchy of the dungeon's overlords. The distribution of loot felt like blood money, a distraction from the horrors they had just perpetrated. Donut eagerly absorbed a magical tome, manifesting ethereal armor, while Carl equipped a pair of grotesque spiked knee pads fashioned from the flayed skin of gnolls. This constant forced adaptation, wearing the literal remains of their enemies, was slowly stripping away their humanity, turning them into patchwork warriors of the deep. Their return journey yielded a discovery that sent a different kind of chill down Carl's spine. Slumped against a stone wall was the lifeless body of a fellow human crawler, a young woman with vibrant tattoos. The system interface identified her killer not as a monster, but as another human named Frank Q. She had been shot through the heart, stripped of all her meager possessions, and left with nothing but an apple core. The psychological impact of this sight was monumental. The dungeon was not merely a battle against alien beasts, it was a pressure cooker designed to rapidly degrade human morality. Carl felt a cold, simmering rage replace his previous dread. The memory of his abusive father surfaced, a stark reminder that cruelty was an inherent human trait, now weaponized by the apocalypse. He made a silent, grim vow to hunt down the murderer, accepting that the rules of civilization had been entirely replaced by the brutal pragmatism of the dark. This grim realization was further cemented when they returned to the safe room to witness the galactic premiere of their suffering. The television broadcast was an exercise in absolute nauseating exploitation. Hosted by a four-eyed reptilian creature whose commentary was laced with condescension, the show framed the destruction of Earth not as a tragedy, but as a much-needed intervention. The syndicate carefully curated footage of human squalor, war, and depravity, broadcasting slums and violence to billions of alien viewers to justify the planetary harvest. The psychological violation of seeing humanity's darkest moments cherry-picked for entertainment was profound. The broadcast then transitioned to a highlight reel of slaughter, showing terrified people trampled by nightmares or torn apart by floating monstrosities. Yet, it also showcased the survivors, a young girl turning her pet dogs into armored instruments of war, groups of desperate humans tearing down colossal beasts. Carl watched in stony silence. They were all just gladiators in an incomprehensibly vast colosseum, their pain transformed into content, their survival dependent on how much blood they were willing to spill for the amusement of the stars. Realizing that finding a staircase to the next level was a mathematical near impossibility without rapid transit, they ventured into the territory of the goblin engineers. What followed was a surreal, almost comedic subversion of expectations. Encountering a fiercely imposing goblin shamanka, adorned with dozens of facial piercings, Donut leveraged her unnaturally enhanced charisma to bypass combat entirely. In a bizarre display of magical empathy, the cat tapped into the goblin's deep-seated psychological trauma. The fearsome warrior broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as she confessed to the horrific cannibalistic rituals her culture demanded, and the crushing existential dread of being an NPC trapped in a collapsing world. The dungeon was a prison for the monsters as well, resetting their minds and forcing them to endlessly repeat their brutal lives until they were deemed worthy of descending deeper. Exploiting this emotional vulnerability, Carl brokered a grim trade. The narcotics he had looted from the llama in exchange for a ramshackle steam-powered copper motorcycle. The transaction immediately sparked a violent turf war between the goblins and the llamas, a chaotic diversion that Carl and Donut used to their advantage. Standing before the heavy wooden doors of the goblin boss's chamber, Carl made a cold, calculated decision. He could not risk a face-to-face confrontation with an unknown warlord. Instead, he systematically loaded a transport cart with barrels of explosive black powder, topping them with highly volatile magical putty and a remote detonator. It was an act of pure, detached, tactical warfare. Carl shoved the rolling bomb into the chamber, Donut slammed the door shut, and they fled through the winding corridors, putting layers of solid stone between themselves and ground zero. When Carl pressed the trigger, the resulting shockwave tore through the dungeon, a catastrophic release of thermal energy that shattered the architecture and ignited the air. The mission was an objective success, punctuated by a cascade of achievement notifications and the confirmation of the warlord's death. But as the dust settled and the distant hiss of ruptured steam engines echoed through the halls, Donut made an offhand conversational remark that froze the blood in Carl's veins. She mentioned, quite casually, the presence of numerous goblin babies inside the room right before the blast. The psychological impact was devastating. The system pinged merrily, showering Carl with experience points and rewards for orchestrating a mass infanticide. The moral high ground he had desperately clung to crumbled into ash. He was no longer just a survivor. He had become a willing participant in the dungeon's indiscriminate cruelty. Staring at the blinking notifications he could not bring himself to read, surrounded by the smell of burning coal and the distant agonizing shrieks of the survivors, Carl realized the true cost of survival. As they mounted the rickety chopper to flee the inferno they had created, heading deeper into the suffocating darkness, Carl carried a weight far heavier than his gear. He carried the crushing, irreversible realization that to beat the dungeon, he might have to lose whatever remained of his own humanity. The weight of survival. The dungeon does not merely seek to kill the body, it seeks to erode the soul. It gamifies trauma, wrapping the unthinkable in the brightly colored packaging of achievements and rewards, forcing the mind to dissociate from the horror of its own actions. As the dust settles in the workshop of the rot stickers, Carl is immediately assaulted by this psychological warfare. The system chimes, cheerful and mocking, announcing the You Monster achievement. The text is a masterclass in gaslighting, sarcastically putting the crawler's mind at ease by claiming the infant mobs are merely transferred to a holding area, before violently ripping that comfort away. It confirms the kill, explicitly placing the burden of a child's death on Carl's conscience. The reward for this psychological torture is a bronze asshole's box and a momentary lapse in guilt that the system explicitly identifies as a lie. This is the dungeon's true nature. It forces you to become the monster it accuses you of being, then laughs when you mourn your humanity. Carl also receives the war criminal achievement for the mass slaughter of non-combatants, a grim reminder that in this subterranean hellscape, the line between self-defense and atrocity is not just blurred, it is erased entirely. In the aftermath of the explosion that cleared the workshop, the mechanics of survival yield their cold fruit. Carl's skills tick upward. Explosives, handling, dangerous explosives handling, and goblin explosives all rise, granting him the new IED skill level 3. This is a significant shift in his archetype. He is moving away from a brawler who simply reacts to danger and becoming an engineer of chaos. The interface now offers a demolitions workshop menu, though it remains locked behind the requirement of a sapper's table, hinting at a future specialization that will require strategic planning rather than just brute force. Donut, meanwhile, grapples with a violation of her identity. The dungeon rewards, or perhaps punishes, her with a desperado past tattoo. To a creature of vanity like Donut, this branding is a fate worse than death. It is a permanent mark of the other, a symbol that she is now part of the underclass of this society, blocked from obtaining a Vanquisher pass. The emotional weight of this is heavy. She feels defiled, her bodily autonomy stripped away by a system that views her as nothing more than content. However, the system also offers a strange mercy in the form of the enchanted fey-scale quadruped crupper of the fleet. This armor, light and flexible, offers protection while catering to her vanity, a small concession in a world of indignities. The duo finds refuge in a safe room that resembles a bleak, bureaucratic waiting area, a dingy DMV at the end of the world. Here, the countdown to the level collapse ticks away, a relentless reminder of their mortality. The screen displays the remaining human population, 3,594, 517. The number drops with a sickening, audible clink, like a leaking faucet draining the lifeblood of humanity. It is in this sterile, hopeless environment that Carl encounters the most dangerous predator in the dungeon, another human being. Carl wakes to the sound of the recap show and a terrifying realization on his minimap. A blue dot right in the safe room, Crawler Frank Q. The man emerges from the women's bathroom, an intrusion that shatters the sanctity of the safe zone. Frank presents himself with the practiced ease of law enforcement, authoritative, apologetic, and disarming. He is level 8, equipped with glowing, spiked shoulder pads and a massive battle axe. But the interface reveals the truth his smile tries to hide. 3 skulls next to his name. Crawler Killer. This encounter is a tense study in the prisoner's dilemma. Frank spins a tragic tale of a raid on a human trafficking ring, of a partner named Maggie lost to the dungeon, and of self-defense. He plays the role of the weary hero perfectly, even eating a cookie that grants experience points, a subtle clue that Carl, in his vigilance, catches. The experience gained is 9.8, not the full 10. Frank is in a party. He is sharing experience. He is not alone. The psychological tension escalates when Carl notices Frank's casual demeanor is a facade. His finger twitches, typing into a private chat. The realization hits Carl with the force of a physical blow. This is an ambush. The partner isn't dead. Frank is the distraction. The dungeon has turned humans into wolves, and the safe room is no longer safe. Carl's reaction is a testament to his growing combat instincts. He signals Donut through the chat, overriding her naive belief in Frank's heroism. The betrayal unfolds in a split second. Frank draws a weapon, and his partner, Maggie Mai, a level 9 crawler with 5 kills to her name, emerges from stealth in the hallway. They fire. But the dungeon has rules, ironclad and merciless. Violence in a safe room is the one forbidden act. The system intervenes, freezing Frank and Maggie in a temporal stasis, branding them with the naughty label. It is a divine intervention by the machine gods of the dungeon, saving Carl and Donut, not out of benevolence, but out of adherence to the rules of the game. They have seconds to escape before the naughty debuff wears off. In their flight, Carl demonstrates a chilling pragmatism. He plants a trap on a rat corpse in the hallway, a lit stick of unstable goblin dynamite hidden within the mob's inventory. It is a brutal, indiscriminate measure, leaving a lethal surprise for the pursuers. This act signifies a hardening of Carl's character. He is no longer just reacting to monsters, he is actively hunting the hunters. They flee on the Chopper, a powered bicycle that serves as their steed across the desolate arteries of the dungeon. As they travel, the isolation of the labyrinth presses in. They are traversing the filler space, the procedural generation between the handcrafted nightmares. The fog of war is a constant enemy, encroaching on their vision, hiding threats, until they are mere feet away. This journey highlights the vast, empty loneliness of the crawl, broken only by the occasional encounter with scat thugs, raccoon-headed monsters that offer little challenge but serve as a reminder that nothing here is truly empty. After hours of travel, the monotony is broken by a sign of civilization, or at least organized desperation. Spray-painted messages guide them to a crossroads. Stairs plus people. It is a beacon of hope, but in the dungeon, hope is often the bait for a trap. They approach cautiously, finding a T-junction that marks the edge of a massive circular zone. Here, they discover the tragedy of the encampment. It is not a fortress of mighty warriors, but a nursing home poured into the bowels of hell. A group of elderly crawlers, most in wheelchairs or leaning on walkers, huddle together. They are the night staff of an elder care facility, Brandon, Chris, Yolanda, and Imani, who refused to abandon their charges when the world collapsed. The sight is heartbreaking. These are the people the system deems waste, yet they survive. Brandon, a level 6 with a comically large hammer, greets them with a mix of relief and confusion. He introduces his team, including Imani, a frail woman who holds a sword and bears the mark of 12 kills. The horror of her level becomes apparent not through words, but through the silence. She has had to mercy kill the residents who could not survive, or who turned. She carries the weight of those souls in her hollow eyes. The encampment is stuck. A burrow boss patrols the circular maze ahead, blocking the only known path to the stairwell. The boss, a massive pink fleshy nightmare that rolls like a ball of death, is invincible to their current strength. The elderly are trapped, a feast waiting for the slaughter. Carl is faced with a choice: abandon these people to their fate and find another path, or stand and fight an impossible enemy. It is here that the hero archetype truly solidifies. Carl chooses to fight, but to fight, they must grind. The dungeon demands a tithe of experience points, and the currency is blood. Carl and Donut head into the neighboring tunnels, hunting troglodytes. These lizard-like creatures, ranging from small pygmies to human-sized bashers, become the whetstones against which the duo sharpens their skills. The combat is visceral and kinetic. Carl's iron punch and smush skills turn him into a bludgeoning instrument, shattering bones and caving in skulls. Donut, evolving from a passive observer to a lethal artillery cannon, rains magic missiles from Carl's shoulder. Their synergy improves. They move as one organism, covering each other's blind spots, learning the dance of violence. They find the boss room, a space that mocks the concept of self-improvement, a 24-hour gym. The sign on the door promises fitness, weights, gains, a satirical reflection of the dungeon's obsession with stats and leveling. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of sweat, oil, and testosterone. The boss, the juicer, is a grotesque parody of toxic masculinity and steroid culture. He is a troglodyte pumped full of chemical rage, his muscles bulging like tumors, obsessively curling dumbbells that would crush a normal man. The fight is a chaotic brawl amidst the exercise equipment. The juicer attacks not with claws or magic, but with gym equipment, hurling massive weight plates like frisbees. The room becomes a storm of flying metal and shattering mirrors. Carl utilizes confusing fog scrolls, turning the gym into a blinding mist, a tactical move that buys them precious seconds. But the juicer is relentless. He speaks in the broken, aggressive dialect of a gym bro, complaining about his gains while trying to crush Carl's skull. The battle turns desperate. Carl is pinned, his health plummeting as the juicer crushes his windpipe. It is a moment of near death, the screen fading to red. Then, salvation comes from the most unlikely source. Donut, the prize-winning cat, abandons her ranged safety. She leaps onto the monstrosity's back, not with magic, but with primal fury. She bites into the juicer's steroid-engorged neck vein, tearing it open. It is a gruesome, savage act that breaks the video game illusion. This is a cat eating a monster alive to save her person. The distraction works. The juicer, confused and bleeding out, releases Carl. Donut is swatted away, hitting the wall with a sickening crunch that stops Carl's heart. But the opening is there. Carl delivers the final blow, stepping through the monster's skull like a rotten melon. The victory is hollow as Carl rushes to Donut's broken body. Her health is a sliver. The fear is real. The resurrection mechanics of the dungeon are cruel and limited. But she survives, her legs snapping back into place as the healing potion takes effect. Even in her pain, she retains her dramatic flair, feigning a Shakespearean death scene before demanding they loot the room. The aftermath of the battle brings them to a training guild where they debrief with Mordecai. The strategy session reveals the depth of the game's mechanics. Mordecai points out their inefficiencies. Donut's low constitution makes her glass cannon build risky, and Carl's reliance on scrolls is hampered by his low intelligence stat. They need to optimize. The loot, as always, is a mix of the absurd and the powerful. Carl receives the two chicks at the same time achievement for a brutal double kill, a reference that lands with dark humor. But the real prize is the enchanted war gauntlet of the exalted Gruul. This item transforms Carl's hand into a spiked wrecking ball, further cementing his role as a monk-brawler hybrid. However, it is Mordecai's offhand comment about the gods that chills the blood. When discussing the lore of the item, which references a war god named Gruul, Mordecai breaks character to offer a stark warning. There are no real gods in this game, just those who pay for the privilege. This line recontextualizes the entire experience. The beings watching, the showrunners, the entities that created this dungeon, they are not divine. They are merely wealthy, powerful, and bored. The suffering of the crawlers, the death of the children, the struggle of the elderly, it is all content for a galactic audience. Carl looks at his new gauntlet, a weapon given to him by his captors, and realizes that every level he gains, every monster he kills, is just playing into their hands. But he has no choice. To break the game, he must first win it. The weight of leadership. With the juicer dead and their levels pushed to 9, Carl and Donut return to the encampment of the elderly, not as conquerors, but as guides. The mood in the nursing home group is one of fragile hope, mixed with the permeating scent of despair and antiseptic. Brandon and his team look to Carl with an expectation that feels heavier than any barbell. They see a savior. Carl sees a logistics nightmare. The plan to take down the borough boss requires more than just brute strength. It requires coordination. Carl begins to strip the gym of every movable object: weights, benches, bars. His inventory becomes a portable arsenal of blunt force trauma. He is thinking like an engineer again. If they cannot outpower the massive rolling flesh ball in the maze, they must change the terrain. As they prepare, the reality of the crawler-killer threat looms in the background. Carl spends time defacing the signs pointing to the safe zone, altering directions, hiding the path to the vulnerable elderly. It is a quiet act of protection, acknowledging that the monsters in the dungeon are not the only things hunting the weak. The skulls next to names like Frank, Q, and Maggie. My are not badges of honor. They are warnings of a predation that has nothing to do with survival and everything to do with cruelty. The group moves toward the Taco Bell rest area, a sentence that would be absurd in any other reality, but is a lifeline here. The promise of food and a momentary respite drives them forward. Along the way, Carl watches Donut. She is changing. The desperado tattoo on her shoulder is hidden by her new armor, but the psychological mark remains. She is fiercer, quicker to anger, her vanity now armored in fey steel. The dungeon is stripping away the pampered showcat and forging something dangerous. They grind through the remaining mobs, the troglodyte virtuosos, with their whipping tongues falling before the combined might of the party. Carl notices the way the elderly crawlers look at the violence. They are terrified, but there is also a spark of something else: adaptation. The human spirit, even at the end of its life, refuses to go quietly. As they settle in to wait for the next recap episode, the tension is palpable. They have 40 hours until the level collapse. 40 hours to train a group of geriatric civilians to fight a boss that destroyed a party of 40 able-bodied men. The math is against them. The odds are impossible. But as Carl looks at his new gauntlet, glowing with the dark enchantment of a fake god. He knows one thing. The dungeon thrives on the impossible, and he is just getting started. The recap show begins to play on the screens, a montage of death and spectacle, and somewhere in the galaxy, trillions of eyes are watching, waiting to see if the man with no pants and the talking cat can perform a miracle. The screen flickers. The face of the crawler killer, Frank Q, flashes for a moment during the In Memoriam segment. Or perhaps it's a wanted segment. No, he's still alive. The trap didn't kill him. The dynamite in the rat was a gamble that may not have paid off yet. That threat is still out there, stealthy and vengeful, tracking them through the dark. Carl closes his eyes, listening to the breathing of the sleeping elderly, the hum of the dungeon, and the soft rhythmic cleaning of a cat who has tasted blood and found she doesn't mind the flavor. The game continues, and the only way out is down. The Symphony of the Swine. With merely 6.5 hours remaining until the architectural annihilation of the subterranean landscape, an oppressive, suffocating weight settled upon the shoulders of the weary survivors. Carl stood before the colossal, imposing entryway of the regional overlord's sanctum, his mind haunted by a singular, devastating metric that refused to fade from his consciousness. 2,552,085. In the span of a few agonizing, blood-drenched days, the human population trapped within this cosmic slaughterhouse had plummeted from millions to this fragile, terrified fraction. Each erased digit represented a breathing, dreaming soul, a mother, a friend, an entire lineage, entirely extinguished for the fleeting amusement of a cold, observing universe. The psychological toll of comprehending such a cataclysmic loss threatened to buckle his sanity, yet he forced himself to focus. Beside Carl, Princess Donut, the radiant feline companion whose preternatural charisma had already begun to bend the game's reality to her favor, perched delicately upon his shoulder. They were accompanied by a fractured coalition of survivors. Brandon, harboring a tempestuous, lightning-infused warhammer within his digital storage. The eternally silent Chris, bearing the quiet scars of unseen trauma. The grimly determined Imani, Yolanda, and the dangerously oblivious Agatha, whose rusted shopping cart rattled across the stone like a harbinger of doom, completely detached from the apocalyptic reality. As the massive gates sealed shut behind them, the atmosphere violently and bizarrely fractured. The cavernous courtyard dissolved, its ancient stone barriers sinking mechanically into the earth, replaced by the frenetic, ultraviolet pulse of an interstellar rave. Deafening electronic bass resonated through the bedrock, accompanied by strobing neon lasers that cut through the sudden darkness. It was a grotesque juxtaposition, the darkest hour of human survival scored by the hyperactive beat of a cosmic dance club. Then the monstrosity finally revealed itself. An entity designated as the Ball of Swine, an abhorrent, squirming manifestation of the orcish supremacy. This level 15 terror was an ancient, magically fused sphere comprised of dozens of corrupted aristocrats. Squealing, rippling pink flesh, dotted with random tusks, chaotic, unblinking eyes, and the tragicomic remnants of shredded tuxedos and sequined gowns hurtled through the neon-lit corridors with the unstoppable momentum of a runaway locomotive. It was a harrowing physical representation of a bureaucratic ruling class, amalgamated into a singular, mindless engine of destruction, designed to literally crush the weak beneath its collective, oppressive weight. The architecture of desperation. Survival in this algorithmic purgatory rarely favored brute force over desperate, improvised ingenuity. Recognizing the indestructible momentum of the fleshy sphere, Carl orchestrated a frenzied architectural countermeasure, leaning heavily into the innate human capacity for creation amidst destruction. Utilizing salvaged goblin workshop tables, heavy weightlifting rigs, and thick-toothed bolts, The team had spent grueling hours constructing a modular, slanted barricade, a makeshift tortoiseshell of heavy steel designed to wedge the unstoppable force between the floor and the descending ceiling. As the labyrinthine walls magically shifted and groaned, forging a deadly track that funneled the squealing monstrosity toward their exact coordinates, the survivors huddled beneath their claustrophobic sanctuary. The psychological terror of waiting for an unavoidable impact, feeling the vibrations of the approaching behemoth through the soles of their feet, tested the very limits of their sanity. When the collision finally occurred, it was an apocalyptic symphony of shrieking steel and groaning bedrock. The barricade shuddered violently, throwing the survivors to their knees as support beams bowed under the immense, crushing pressure of the trapped abomination. The ceiling latticework began to buckle ominously as the fleshy mass was squeezed against the upper confines of the tunnel, threatening to bury them in a tomb of twisted metal and alien meat. In the suffocating darkness, Carl and his companions thrust makeshift spears and bladed tools upward through the gaps into the bulging flesh. The air grew impossibly thick, with the stench of copper, rot and raw sewage as they punctured the beast, relying on the compounding mathematical damage of enchanted ninja stars affixed to their defenses. Suddenly, the atmospheric pressure violently equalized. With a deafening, balloon-like rupture, the ball of swine burst. A torrential rain of gore and disoriented stout pigmen in glittering formal wear showered the collapsed sanctuary. The aristocratic tuskling knights and courtesans, stripped of their magical momentum and blissfully unaware of their time within the sphere, lay bewildered amidst the wreckage. Carl's survival instinct flared into a primal, unyielding rage. Relying entirely on the devastating kinetic enhancements of his spiked gauntlet, he delivered bone-shattering strikes, systematically obliterating the alien nobles before they could rally. Above him, Princess Donut unleashed a torrent of arcane missiles, her elegant, devastating magic contrasting fiercely with the visceral butchery occurring below. When the neon lights finally stabilized and the adrenaline faded, the arena was silent, painted in the tragic, absurd carnage of a ruined intergalactic gala. The philosophical horror lingered heavy in the air. These alien beings draped in Earth-like tuxedos were merely pawns themselves, manipulated by the Syndicate's grand overarching design to seed universal cultures with familiar aesthetics, simply to foster greater entertainment value for the viewers at home. The illusion of the spectacle. The path to the next descent offered a sudden, surreal deviation that shattered Carl's grip on reality. Crossing the threshold of what should have been the next subterranean nightmare, Carl and his feline sovereign were instantaneously transported to a jarringly opulent environment. The damp, blood-soaked dungeon dissolved entirely, replaced by the plush blue velvet interior of a luxury yacht rocking gently upon Earth's surface waters. Looking through a small porthole, Carl saw the moon reflecting off the ocean, a heartbreaking glimpse of a world that was already functionally dead. This space was a production trailer, a temporal bubble shielded from the immediate horrors below. Here, they were intercepted by Lexis, a painfully thin alien associate producer whose hollow, avian presence underscored the vast, incomprehensible bureaucracy driving the broadcast. She offered them a brief, disorienting reprieve before escorting them into the heart of the universe's most influential talk show. Stepping through an irising portal, they crossed from the quiet yacht into a sprawling, holographic studio set against a mesmerizing cosmic nebula. The sensory shock was absolute and paralyzing. An unseen audience of trillions, comprised of aquatic leviathans suspended in water pods, avian scholars, and shadowy, multi-limbed entities, roared their approval, shaking the very fabric of the virtual architecture. Seated behind the host's desk was Odette, a figure who perfectly encapsulated the extreme commodification of the organic form. Her lower half was that of a colossal, chitinous king crab, while her upper torso presented a hypersexualized, absurdly proportioned human female form, all crowned by the chilling, triangular visage of a praying mantis. Despite the overwhelming cosmic horror of the situation, Princess Donut adapted with a terrifying, innate grace. Utilizing her bred-in-the-bone understanding of pageantry from her days in show circuits, the cat captivated the interstellar audience. She wove a masterful, utterly fabricated tapestry of lore, convincing the watching galaxies that Earth cats operated under an elective monarchy based entirely on physical perfection. Carl, meanwhile, found his profound trauma packaged into a comedic compilation reel of his exasperated outbursts, forced to watch his own near-death experiences played for laughs. The universe did not care about his suffering. They cared about his catchphrases. It was a chilling psychological revelation for Carl. The true battle was not merely against the monsters in the dark, but against the ravenous, insatiable apathy of an audience that demanded constant charismatic suffering. The strings of the syndicate. Once the broadcast officially concluded and the massive holographic audience evaporated into the ether, the grotesque illusion of the stage rapidly fell away. Odette dismantled her monstrous exterior, casually discarding the massive crab chassis and the insectoid helmet to reveal a scarred, completely legless older human woman levitating upon an anti-gravity disc. She chillingly revealed that the studio maintained a nest of actual giant crabs, slaughtering one for every broadcast just so she could wear its shell as a costume. This raw, gruesome reality served as a stark commentary on the extreme sacrifices and morbid lengths demanded by the intergalactic entertainment industry. Her bizarre, fabricated body was merely a replica of the armor she had worn upon her own near-fatal exit from the dungeon cycles ago. In the quiet confines of the studio, Odette delivered a masterclass in cosmic cynicism, fundamentally altering Carl's understanding of the trials ahead. The seemingly random distribution of survival resources, the coveted loot boxes, was an elaborate, highly manipulated lie. The artificial intelligence governing the dungeon was a purely profit-driven entity. If a crawler's agonizing death promised a sudden spike in viewership and sponsor revenue, the system would ruthlessly deny them salvation. Conversely, if their continued survival generated unprecedented financial engagement, the algorithmic gods would conveniently bestow the exact legendary artifact needed to cheat death and return to the fray. Odette imparted crucial warnings concerning the Borant Corporation, the corporate overlords derisively labeled as mudskippers, and urged Donut to preserve her feline form, warning that altering her species would alienate her deeply invested fan base. Carl realized with sickening clarity that their agency was a carefully curated illusion. They were gladiators in a rigged casino, their every breath monetized, their very souls evaluated daily against a cosmic, uncaring balance sheet. The institutional descent. Returning to the unforgiving reality of the crawl, Carl and Donut materialized on the second subterranean tier. The atmosphere here entirely abandoned the cavernous, medieval dread of the previous floor, adopting instead a chillingly sterile, institutional aesthetic. The pathways were forged from unbreakable cinder block and blinding white flooring, evoking the cold, clinical detachment of a brutalist asylum. This mundane, earthly architecture only amplified the surreal horror of the alien ecosystem that inhabited it. The macabre ecological reality of this new depth revealed itself almost immediately. Level 2. Brindle grubs, grotesque, bloated worms lacking appendages, writhed sluggishly through the corridors. These entities served as the dungeon's janitorial staff, feeding upon the festering remains of fallen combatants. Left unchecked, their consumption allowed them to metamorphose into far greater, more lethal threats. Carl, burdened by the grim necessity of long-term survival, undertook the psychologically taxing labor of systematically obliterating the corpses they encountered. It was a grim, stomach-churning hygienic practice required to stunt the environment's deadly evolution, showcasing how the dungeon forced crawlers to abandon their humanity piece by piece. The true kinetic threat of the sector manifested shortly after: danger dingoes. These were not the feral, earthly scavengers of the outback, but massive, mastiff-sized monstrosities. Their fur grew in distinct patterns mimicking the stark, monochromatic corpse paint of heavy metal musicians, and their prehistoric saber-like fangs dripped with malice. However, the sheer lethality of Princess Donut had dramatically evolved. Harboring a deep-seated feline vendetta against canine forms, she unleashed a devastating barrage of arcane artillery, obliterating the beasts in a breathtaking display of magical supremacy that left only smoldering gore in its wake. Their tense journey through this sterilized nightmare eventually led them to a vast, abandoned storm shelter. Outfitted with rows of dusty cots and inexplicably French-labeled restroom facilities, it provided a fleeting, eerie sanctuary from the madness, offering a momentary breath before the inevitable next wave of systematic slaughter. The economy of survival. Within the cold, concrete safety of the shelter, the bizarre mechanics of their imprisonment offered moments of twisted levity heavily laced with profound existential dread. As Carl sifted through the spoils of their previous conquest, the artificial intelligence's sadistic sense of humor was laid bare. He received a temporal elixir that permanently hardened his unarmed combat prowess alongside a bafflingly complex, magically enchanted pedicure kit. This absurd artifact offered staggering offensive enhancements, provided he traversed the blood-soaked, hazardous dungeon entirely barefoot. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, forcing the crawler to trade basic physical dignity and comfort for martial superiority. Donut, conversely, discovered the dark luxury of a cosmic subscription service, pulling a glowing necromantic tome from a suburban mailbox planted inexplicably in the concrete floor. The spell allowed her to resurrect fallen enemies, to fight as undead thralls on their behalf, an elegant, terrifying expansion of her lethal repertoire that completely disregarded her delicate sensibilities. The fragile piece of the safe room shattered as the systemic broadcast hijacked the room's mounted monitors. The overarching artificial intelligence coldly announced that the planetary death toll, a staggering erasure of over 700,000 additional lives, was mathematically insufficient for their seasonal projections. To correct this perceived deficit in suffering, the countdown to the floor's total collapse was drastically accelerated, resetting to a mere 6 days. Following this grim adjustment, the system unveiled a new, deeply sinister patronage economy. Survival was now directly tethered to an intergalactic auction house, where a crawler's life could be sponsored for a single nominal credit. The quality of their essential survival resources would now violently fluctuate based entirely on the financial whims and bidding wars of unseen, alien benefactors. Coupled with a surreal, draconian edict punishing poor hallway hygiene with the immediate manifestation of a lethal, high-level rage elemental, the psychological landscape of the game was permanently and brutally altered. As the terrifying announcements faded into the ether, Donut excitedly noted the arrival of her very first official spectator. Instantly, her natural, genuine demeanor vanished, replaced by a calculated, artificially casual persona designed solely for mass consumption. Carl watched his companion in silent horror. The true monster of the dungeon was no longer just the flesh-tearing beasts lurking in the dark, but the insidious, transformative power of the audience, slowly eroding their authentic selves for the fleeting applause of a dying, voyeuristic universe. The grind of the rev-up. The countdown clock to the floor's total collapse ticked mercilessly, standing at just over 5 days. For Carl and Princess Donut, however, the more immediate numbers were the ones dictating their social standing in this galactic spectacle. 69 billion views. It is a staggering figure that highlights the voyeuristic nature of the universe they are trapped in, a cosmos that watches human suffering with the same casual interest one might afford a reality television show. As they approached the quadrant housing the stairwell, the map revealed a tutorial guild and a safe room, beacons of respite in a landscape designed to murder them. The plan was pragmatic, born of the necessity that defines the crawler's existence. Probe the monsters, assess the threat level, and clear the path. Their objective was to escort Team Meadow Lark, a group of elderly survivors, into the safety of the stairwell. But before altruism could take the stage, survival had to play its part. Carl and Donut had awoken to skyrocketed social statistics. Donut, the prize-winning Persian cat with a penchant for drama, had eclipsed Carl in favorites, a mechanic that Mordecai, their manager, had explained was a limited resource for the audience. It made grim sense. In a dungeon of blood and gore, the audience clung to the entertaining absurdity of a talking cat. Carl accepted this secondary status with a stoic resignation. His role was not to be the star, but to be the engine that kept them alive. As they navigated the fractured concrete of the quadrant, the environment itself seemed to conspire against them. The floor was a hazard of sharp stones and uneven ground, a subtle environmental hostility typical of the dungeon's design. Carl's feet, however, now glittered with a supernatural sheen, the result of a pedicure kit applied by Imani, the stoic nurse from the other team. The buff provided unbreakable bones for his exposed feet, a ridiculous aesthetic for a terrifying immunity, perfectly encapsulating the dungeon's dual nature of horror and farce. The enemies ahead were revealed to be Cluricorns. These were not the whimsical fae of Earth's folklore, but grotesque, troll-like distortions. They sat in a torch-lit room playing dice, their appearances marred by ruddy cheeks, tattered green overalls, and the sickly symptoms of illness. The system identified them as unvaccinated Cluricorn rev-up consultants. The lore here was a biting satire, twisting the concept of Earth's multi-level marketing schemes and anti-science rhetoric into a literal toxic threat. These creatures were distant, hillbilly cousins of leprechauns who hoarded not gold, but questionable business schemes and Polaroids. The warning was clear. They were fairy-class mobs, inflicting extra damage due to Carl's goblin heritage, and they carried a contagion. The strategy shifted from charm to artillery. Donut, whose charisma usually allowed her to sway simple-minded mobs, could not risk close contact with these disease-ridden salesmen. They opted for a barrage of magic missiles. The combat was swift and clinical. Donut eliminated the threats from a distance, her magic missiles striking with lethal precision. But the aftermath revealed the darker path their power was taking. Donut utilized a spell called Second Chance, a necromantic ability that reanimated one of the fallen Cluricons. There is a profound psychological weight to necromancy, a violation of the natural order that even in a digital dungeon feels transgressive. The zombie, glowing with a neon purple hue matching Donut's aura, stood as a groaning testament to their growing power. When Donut commanded it to dismantle its former companions, the scene descended into visceral horror. The zombie obeyed with a disturbing, almost ecstatic enthusiasm, ripping intestines from the corpses. It was a moment that tested Carl's stomach, a reminder that to survive the dungeon, one must often become as monstrous as its inhabitants. They looted the bodies, relying on Donut's inventory ability to avoid touching the toxic remains. The prize was toilet-grade moonshine, a volatile liquid that served as both a potent alcohol and a high-grade explosive. This discovery sparked the crawler's ingenuity in Carl. He wasn't a mage or a warrior by trade, he was a tinkerer. By combining the moonshine with goblin oil and a torch, he crafted a new weapon, Carl's Juggo Boom. The game system, always watching and categorizing, recognized the creation immediately. It awarded Carl an achievement and named the item after him, cementing his legacy in the dungeon's codex. The test of this weapon was devastatingly effective. A single jug incinerated a room of corpses, the blue flame scrubbing the area of contagion. It was a moment of triumph, yet it underscored a somber reality. Carl was becoming a master of destruction, his name now synonymous with fire and death, the pyramid scheme of death. As they pushed deeper into the quadrant, the satire of the floor became more overt and insidious. They found pamphlets promoting the rev-up lifestyle, promising financial independence and the chance to be one's own boss. It was a direct parody of predatory pyramid schemes, weaponized by the dungeon AI to mock human culture. The Cluricorns were not just monsters, they were victims of a downline, trapped in a cycle of selling toxic sludge. They encountered a filling room, an industrial nightmare where the moonshine was bottled. Here, the hierarchy of this absurd society became clear. Overseeing the grunt workers were the Laminacs, winged fairies, who functioned as the elite consultants. These creatures, resembling miniature, winged soccer moms with "can I speak to your manager" haircuts, were immune to the toxicity they peddled. Carl devised a plan that relied on Donut's charm and a cold-blooded betrayal. They needed to clear the room to harvest the moonshine, but a direct assault was too risky. Donut, using her Pied Piper ability, charmed the winged Laminacs, convincing them that she was a potential investor or high-ranking royal. She lured them away from their workers and into a trap where Carl lay in wait. The execution of the plan was a masterclass in dungeon brutality. Donut led the two fairies, Caroline and Max, into a small foyer where Carl waited with his incendiary jugs. The moment of realization for the fairies that they were not dealing with a client but an executioner was brief and tragic. Carl unleashed the fire. One fairy was snatched from the air by Donut and crunched between her jaws, a savage act that highlighted the cat's predatory instincts beneath her tiara. The other, screaming in desperation and calling for a manager named Damien, was shot down by Carl's slingshot. The loot from these consultants was gruesome, but necessary: their corpses. The game hinted that their essence provided protection against disease. This was the grim economy of the crawl. Everything, even the bodies of sentient enemies, was a resource to be harvested. They returned to the main room to loot, collecting massive quantities of moonshine. But the true horror lay behind the boss door. It was marked with a "Live, Laugh, Love" sign, a banality that masked the terror within. Carl, sensing the danger of a direct confrontation in a confined space, hesitated. He began to prepare a rev-up immunity smoothie, using a bicycle-powered blender found in the room. The recipe required blending a Laminac corpse with moonshine. It was a task that stripped away the last veneers of civilization, requiring Carl to stuff a humanoid body into a glass jar and liquefy it. But the dungeon does not wait for the crawlers to be ready. The boss door blasted open, and the Krakarin emerged. This was not a simple monster, it was a thematic abomination. A clone of a neighborhood boss, the Krakarin was a fusion of a giant octopus and an angry, entitlement-driven suburbanite. Its tentacles ended not in suckers, but in human mouths that screamed incessantly. The smoothie and the sacrifice. The battle that ensued was a chaotic scramble for survival. The Krakarin was a neighborhood boss, a significant threat that could leave its room, shattering the safety crawlers usually relied on. Tentacles burst through walls, destroying the environment. Carl, amidst the screaming mouths and flying debris, frantically pedaled the stationary bike to finish the smoothie. The resulting concoction was pink, sparkling, and vile. It offered immunity to the taint and vigorous measles, diseases the boss inflicted. Carl downed the mixture, fighting the urge to vomit, and forced Donut to do the same. The immunity held, but the sheer physical force of the Krakarin was overwhelming. They were battered, relying on potions and desperate maneuvers. In the heat of combat, Donut's facade cracked. Drunk on the buzzed debuff from the smoothie, she confessed her love for Carl, a moment of genuine connection amidst the madness, even if she qualified it by ranking him below her former owner's dog. It was a reminder that beneath the magical enhancements and the talking, she was still a confused, displaced animal looking for safety. The turning point came through improvisation. Carl, battered and barely standing, commanded a zombie cluricorn to act as a suicide bomber. He handed the undead creature a juggo boom and a stick of dynamite, sending it running into the boss chamber. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. It was not a clean victory. It was a desperate, messy survival. Carl woke up deaf, blind, and broken, his health critically low. He had survived only by the grace of his enchanted pedicure and Donut's frantic use of a healing scroll. As his senses returned, they explored the ruins of the boss room. The Crackeran's corpse was a nightmare of biology, a giant octopus with a beaked mouth and running mascara, clutching a cage of dead grubs. It was a grotesque monument to the dungeon's twisted creativity. The admin and the boogaboo. They retreated to the tutorial guild to debrief with Mordecai. The shape-shifting manager had assumed a new form for this floor, a boogaboo. He was a towering, terrifying creature, with owl-like eyes and skinny limbs, a creepy neighbor archetype made flesh. Despite his monstrous appearance, Mordecai remained their anchor, a weary guide trapped in his own eternal purgatory. The respite was interrupted by the arrival of Zev, a representative from the Borunt Corporation. Zev was a Quartin, the aquatic race running the dungeon, but she appeared in a ridiculous retro sci-fi watersuit. Her presence shifted the tone from survival horror to bureaucratic dystopianism. She wasn't a powerful overlord. She was a harried middle manager, terrified of her own superiors and the political machinations of the party, an ultra-nationalist faction controlling the corporation. This meeting peeled back the layers of the dungeon's reality. The admins were just employees. The crawlers were content creators. Zev's breakdown, where she bonded with Donut over Earth TV shows like Gossip Girl, highlighted the absurdity of their situation. The oppressors were fans of the oppressed. Zev warned them of the accelerated timeline. The corporation was bankrupt, and the government wanted the crawlers dead faster to liquidate the assets. It was a chilling revelation. The game was rigged not just for entertainment, but for a speedy execution. The infinite swarm. As Zev departed, the dungeon's hostility spiked. A horde of grubs, the waste disposal mobs of the floor, flooded the hallway. These were not pre-seeded monsters. They were spawning infinitely, triggered by the mass of corpses Carl and Donut had created. It was a punishment for their efficiency, a janitor mechanic gone rogue. They had to move. The goal was to rendezvous with Team Meadowlark and get them to the stairs. The journey back was a slog through a carpet of writhing larvae, a visceral test of endurance. When they finally met the other team, they found a marvel of ingenuity. Brandon and Imani had constructed a train using wheelchairs and goblin tools linked by a magical chain. It was a symbol of human adaptability, a way to transport the elderly and infirm through hell. The reunion was bittersweet. They were a community of survivors, clinging to dignity in a place designed to strip it away. Mrs. McGibbons, a 99-year-old woman, flirted with Carl, her spirit unbroken by the apocalypse. It was a moment of levity, a reminder of the humanity they were fighting to preserve. But in the dungeon, levity is often the prelude to tragedy, the rage of the elemental. The disaster struck with the banality of human error. Jack, an elderly man with a loose grip on reality, and his bladder urinated on the dungeon wall. It was a violation of the dungeon's strict hygiene rules. The response was immediate and disproportionate. A player-killer skull appeared over Yolanda, the nurse who tried to stop him, but it was too late. From the urine stain, a rage elemental was born. This was a level 93 monstrosity, a creature of smoke and obsidian claws that defied the laws of physics. It was an executioner sent to punish a minor infraction. Yolanda, a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for others, didn't hesitate. She fired arrows that shattered uselessly against the beast. In a heartbeat, she and the elderly man, Randall, were unmade, shredded into red mist by the elemental's claws. There was no time to mourn. The monster turned its gaze on Carl and the train. Carl activated his protective shell, a desperate defensive spell that created a static barrier. It bought them seconds, bouncing the elemental back, but the creature retaliated with a spell of its own, reverse gravity. The world upended. Carl, Donut, and the last car of the train, carrying Mrs. McGibbons, fell upward, crashing onto the ceiling. The disorientation was absolute. Carl, forcing himself to run upside down, scooped up the elderly woman. It was a sequence of pure adrenaline, a race against a reality-bending predator. As the gravity spell faded, they plummeted back to the floor, bruised and battered, scrambling for the safety of the nearby safe room. They made it inside by inches. Carl hurled a juggo boom at the pursuing monster, not to kill it, but to buy a fraction of a second to slam the door. The explosion roared, and the elemental screamed in fury, pounding against the invulnerable barrier of the safe room. They were safe, but the cost had been exorbitant. Yolanda was gone. Randall was gone. Jack was dead by his own foolishness. Inside the safe room, disguised as a big-shot chicken restaurant, the survivors collapsed. The recap episode began to play on the screens, a cruel replaying of their trauma edited for maximum entertainment. They watched the deaths of their friends in slow motion, the system mocking their loss with jaunty graphics. But the horror wasn't over. The message board updated with a new rule. Safe rooms would now close 1 hour before the floor collapse. The sanctuary was temporary. The noose was tightening. And outside, the rage elemental was still waiting, screaming at the door. It had dissipated the grub swarm, but it remained fixated on them. Carl looked at the map, at the impossible odds, and then at the trembling survivors. The despair threatened to take hold, to crush him under the weight of the inevitable. But Carl didn't break. He looked at the timers, the resources, and the threats, and his mind began to work. He wouldn't just survive, he would break their game. He began to pull weights and items from his inventory, turning to Brandon. The plan had changed. They couldn't wait for cooldowns. They had to act now, and they were going to need everything they had to survive the next hour. The lore of the dungeon was written in blood, but Carl was determined to hold the pen for the next chapter. The bomb chicken. The desperation of the dungeon breeds a unique kind of ingenuity, a frantic creativity where the line between brilliance and madness blurs. In the safety of the restaurant, Carl and his makeshift team finalized their latest instrument of destruction. It was a launcher, a crude contraption of wood and scavenged wheels, spray-painted with the moniker Mother of All Bombs. The name was a point of contention. Brandon, clinging to technical accuracy, argued for the term's literal military definition, while Carl insisted on the pun. It was a trivial argument, yet these small moments of bickering provided a necessary psychological anchor, a fleeting reminder of human normalcy before they faced the abyss. The device, eventually dubbed the bomb chicken by the group, was designed to deliver explosives, babies, while on the move. During construction, a crucial mechanic of the dungeon's physics revealed itself. Explosives within a safe room were rendered inert. The countdowns on the dynamite ticked away, yet the threat of detonation was suspended by the system's safe zone rules. It was a gamble to trust this mechanic, a leap of faith that the rules wouldn't suddenly shift, but it was the only way to prep their arsenal safely. The plan was a high-stakes exploitation of the dungeon's artificial intelligence. They weren't trying to kill the level 93 rage elemental through brute force. They were trying to trick it. By opening the safe room door, They triggered the mob's teleportation mechanic, forcing the beast to reset its position. It was a terrifying game of peekaboo, testing the monster's reaction times and its primitive, single-minded hatred. Once they confirmed the elemental would teleport away when the door opened, the stage was set for their escape. They removed the sidecar from the chopper to fit through the exit, replacing it with a trailer for the launcher and a seat for Princess Donut. She sat facing backward, a fuzzy tail gunner ready to rain fire. When the door opened, the elemental lunged and vanished, buying them the precious seconds needed to accelerate into the blackened, ash-choked hallway. The race was on. This sequence highlights the sheer adrenaline of the crawl, the sensory overload of the burning air, the rattle of the jury-rigged trailer, and the terrifying speed of the pursuing monster. The elemental was faster than their machine, a relentless force of nature. Their survival hinged on the babies. These weren't just bombs. They were weighted, wheeled vehicles designed to roll backward, countering the chopper's forward momentum to remain stationary relative to the ground. It was physics weaponized against magic. As they sped through the corridors, dodging the pulsating mounds of grub pupae, Donut deployed the arsenal. First came the heavy bombs, then the boom babies. The hallway erupted in blue flame and shrapnel. They utilized every tool available, dropping a weighted chain to tangle the monster's legs and deploying shredders to rip open the chrysalis sacs of the dormant grubs, creating distractions. The chaos was absolute. The elemental, slowed by the chain and distracted by the newly hatched horrors, still pursued, its health barely chipped. The climax of this chase brought them to the stairwell, a gaping hole in the floor leading to the next level. The chopper's boiler was critical, on the verge of exploding. In a final act of calculated recklessness, Carl ordered an oil slick deployed. They leaped from the moving vehicle, sending the chopper careening into the abyss. But safety wasn't the goal yet. Carl intended to break the game. Standing at the edge of the pit, he baited the monster. The rage elemental, blinded by fury and slipping on the oil, charged. At the last possible second, Donut cast a teleportation spell, whisking them to safety down the hall. The monster, unable to stop, plummeted into the hole. The dungeon's logic, unable to process a high-level mob entering the stairwell, dissolved the creature. There was no explosion of experience points, no loot shower. The system did not reward the kill because they hadn't struck the killing blow. Gravity and the system's own boundaries had done the work. It was a hollow victory in terms of progression, but they were alive. The Death Watch. In the aftermath, the reality of their situation settled in. The survivors of the Meadowlark retirement home prepared to descend. The juxtaposition of the fantastical dungeon against the frailty of these elderly people created a poignant, heartbreaking tableau. Carl's farewell to Mrs. McGibbons was particularly gut-wrenching. Her mind, ravaged by dementia, couldn't grasp the horror of her reality. She spoke of the dungeon as if it were a confused memory, her hands cold, her regret about not having children bubbling to the surface. It was a stark reminder that while Carl fought monsters, these people were fighting the decay of their own minds. With the elderly survivors gone, Carl and Donut pushed into the kobold territory. Here, the dungeon's absurdity ramped up. The kobolds were not dragonkin, but armored chihuahuas riding danger dingoes. It was ridiculous, yet lethal. The combat was visceral, with Donut displaying a newfound proficiency in dispatching canine enemies, hinting at a hidden racial bonus. They sought refuge in another safe room, a barren kitchen offering nothing but mana toast, a useless item that served only to mock their hunger. Their respite was short-lived. The administrative presence of the dungeon shifted. The familiar chaotic Zev was gone, replaced by an administrator named Mukta. The tone changed instantly. This was no longer a negotiation, but a conscription. They were summoned to an interview, not on their terms, but as forced participants in a show called Death Watch Extreme Dungeon Mayhem. Before the transport, Carl examined his new loot. The system, in its sarcastic fashion, awarded him for his trap-making. He received a sapper's table and proximity triggers, tools that would allow him to refine his chaotic engineering into precise ambushes. He also received a Gorgon marital aid, a bizarre tool for reshaping materials. Another example of the dungeon sexualizing even the most utilitarian mechanics. Then they were pulled away. The transition was jarring. They appeared in a cramped, heaving rental trailer, a cheap backstage holding area for the production. The glamour of the crawl was stripped away, revealing the shoestring budget of the galactic entertainment industry. They were pushed onto a set that smelled of salt water, facing an audience that represented the worst of the viewership. This wasn't the sophisticated crowd of the previous talk show. These were bloodthirsty adolescent boys chanting glurp, glurp, and screaming for death. The host, the maestro, was an orc, specifically a member of the Skull Clan, a distinct and more brutish lineage than the Tusklings they had fought earlier. He was a bully in a silk shirt, oozing arrogance and cruelty. The premise of Death Watch was a sadistic game show. The maestro presented two terrified crawlers, Li Jun and Zhang, freezing them in time just moments before their deaths. The game was simple. Guess if the victim survives. If the crawlers guessed correctly, they earned points to save their friends. It was a moral torture chamber. The maestro manipulated the men, trying to force them to choose between saving a sister or a boss, turning their loyalty into a spectator sport. Carl, unable to stomach the cruelty, broke the script. He physically disrupted the illusion, stepping out of the set's bounds. It was a moment of pure defiance. The producers threatened him, but Carl realized his value. He and Donut were high-value assets. The show needed them more than they needed the show. He leveraged their popularity to force his way into the segment, attempting to turn the tables on the maestro. The interplay here is fascinating. Carl understood that you cannot appease a bully, you have to humiliate him. He taunted the maestro, exposing the orc's fragile ego. When the maestro tried to corner the helpless crawlers, Carl goaded the orc, daring him to send the high-level Donut and Carl team into the death trap instead. The maestro, fearful of losing his star guests, relented in a way that allowed the crawlers a slim chance at survival. Carl shouted advice to the victims: ignore the distractions, run through the slow enemies, and against all odds, the team survived. But the maestro had one final poisonous card to play. He brought out two surprise guests. Betrayal. The guests were Frank and Maggie. These were the player killers Carl and Donut had encountered previously, the duo frozen in the safe room with the dynamite-laden rat. But the maestro didn't just bring them out. He aired their dirty laundry in a highlight reel that exposed the depth of human depravity within the dungeon. The footage revealed that Frank and Maggie's backstory was a lie. They weren't just desperate survivors, they were predators. The most horrific revelation concerned their daughter, Yvette. The video showed Maggie strangling the girl after she was injured, killing her own child not out of mercy, but to conserve resources and perhaps gain experience. It showed them hunting down other humans, including the woman Rebecca, betraying trust at every turn. And then came the context of the rat bomb. The footage revealed that Yvette had been in the bathroom of the safe room, hidden under a stealth field, when Carl left the trap. When the bomb went off, it was Carl's explosive that maimed Frank and the girl. Carl was indirectly responsible for the injury that led to the girl's death, a fact the maestro relished in revealing. When Frank and Maggie appeared on stage, they were broken things. Frank was missing a hand, his eyes hollowed out by trauma. Maggie, however, was consumed by a cold, burning hatred. She didn't blame the system, and she didn't blame herself for the filicide. She blamed Carl. She tried to attack him right there on the set, her dagger bouncing off the safety barriers. The psychological weight of this encounter cannot be overstated. Carl, who clings to his humanity by protecting Donut and the elderly, was forced to confront the dark reflection of survival. Maggie represented what happens when morality is discarded entirely for the sake of the crawl. She killed her child to survive. Carl, conversely, risked death to save strangers. The interview descended into chaos. The maestro, failing to get the emotional reaction he wanted from the stoic Carl or the erratic Donut, tried to salvage the segment with gifts. For Carl, he presented a pair of tactical boots. It was a deliberate troll. The maestro knew Carl fought barefoot to utilize his skill buffs. The boots were useless, a mockery of his struggle. Carl, refusing to take the bait, thanked him with feigned politeness, denying the orc the satisfaction of an outburst. For Frank and Maggie, the gift was far more dangerous. A legendary skill potion that would upgrade Frank's tracking ability to a global scale. This meant that no matter where Carl went in the dungeon, these two murderers would be able to find him. As the show ended, the lines were drawn. The maestro revealed his intent to enter the dungeon personally on the 9th floor, as a war leader, setting up a future confrontation. But the immediate threat was closer. As the scene faded, Maggie clutched the tracking potion, staring at Carl with a smile that promised nothing but vengeance. The dungeon had stripped away her humanity, leaving only a monster wearing a mother's face. And now, the monster had a scent: the daddy tax. The silence of the safe room offers a deceptive comfort, a fleeting sanctuary where the ticking clock of the apocalypse is the only sound that truly matters. 3 days and 14 hours remain until the level collapses, a deadline that hangs over Carl's head like a guillotine blade. Outside, the universe watches, 1.7 trillion views. It is a number so vast it loses meaning, reducing the genocide of humanity to a statistical anomaly in a galactic entertainment ledger. Donut, however, operates on a different frequency. For the prize-winning Cocker Spaniel in a cat's body, the trauma of the dungeon is filtered through the lens of celebrity. She speaks of Yvette, the tragic figure from the previous floor, not with the heavy heart of a survivor, but with the detached fascination of a viewer discussing a season finale. She finds relief in the gruesome details. The fact that a mother killed her daughter absolves Carl of the guilt, a twisted logic that only makes sense within the insanity of the world dungeon. While Donut opens loot boxes, finding only trap modules that require a sapper's table they do not yet possess, Carl engages in a ritual of self-care that feels almost rebellious in its normalcy, using a pedicure kit. It is a small act of humanity in a place designed to strip it away. But sleep is the ultimate prize. As they drift off, the dynamic of their partnership solidifies. Donut, insecure and seeking validation about the orc's comments regarding the 9th floor, and Carl, the weary protector, refusing to look that far ahead. To worry about the 9th floor when the 3rd is yet to be conquered is a luxury they cannot afford. The recap show serves as a grim reminder of the stakes. They watch the fate of Le Mouvement, a team from Africa. The dungeon's cruelty is on full display as a city boss, a gelatinous, transparent blob the size of a house, digests the team alive within a sewer system. The camera lingers on the sole survivor locked outside, weeping. It is a voyeuristic feast of despair. The contrast is jarring when the feed cuts to Lucia Marr, the psychopath child, effortlessly dispatching horrors with a magical shield. The show celebrates the spectacle of violence, turning Carl and Donut's desperate escape from the rage elemental into a high-production music video, complete with freeze frames of the explosion. Yet, the system is petty. Experience denied. The screen had flashed. The dungeon AI, in its infinite spite, seemingly withheld the reward because the monster dissolved rather than dying by direct damage. It is a psychological game, a dare to try again, to risk everything for the promise of power. The announcement from the AI brings a shift in the rules, a common occurrence in this volatile reality. The exploit involving the stairs is patched, Non-sapient mobs will no longer be disintegrated. It is a direct response to Carl's actions, a digital slap on the wrist. But with the stick comes a carrot. A new Creator's Fee tab appears in Carl's interface. His Juggo Boom invention is generating royalties, 1 gold coin per kill. It is a macabre passive income, profiting from death with a 25% deposit fee deducted by the system. Highway robbery, even at the end of the world. The arrival of Zev, their Quatin liaison, breaks the tension. She brings news of the outside world, of corporate politics and listener metrics. The interview with the maestro, the arrogant orc prince, has had unforeseen consequences. A snick, a viral video clip akin to a deep fake, has surfaced. It depicts Carl and the maestro in a compromising, explicit scenario. It is the internet culture of Earth magnified to a galactic scale, weaponized to humiliate a prince of the Skull Empire. While Donut finds the pork boy moniker hilarious, Carl senses the looming danger. Humiliating royalty in a syndicate-run universe is a surefire way to paint a target on one's back. They are no longer just crawlers. They are political instigators. Ralph. Leaving the safety of the room, the sensory assault of the dungeon begins anew. They are hunting the neighborhood boss, guided not by tracks but by the thrumming, aggressive cadence of heavy metal music. The sound is physical, a wall of distorted guitars and guttural vocals that vibrate in the marrow of their bones. It creates an atmosphere of adrenaline and aggression, setting the stage for violence. The boss chamber is a kennel, a grim facility of concrete and iron, adorned with Portuguese signage. But unlike the chaotic nests of the vermin they have fought before, this place holds a somber weight. Cages line the walls, filled with danger dingoes, massive, mutated canines that do not snarl, but cower. They are broken things. Carl, ever the pragmatist with a hidden well of empathy, pauses. He sees the scars, the missing eyes, the history of abuse etched into the monster's flesh. Here, the script of the dungeon is flipped. The expectation is slaughter, kill the mobs, clear the room, engage the boss. But Carl chooses kindness. He feeds a biscuit to a one-eyed dingo. The dot on the minimap shifts from the angry red of an enemy to the neutral white of a non-combatant. It is a small rebellion against the game's design, a refusal to be a mindless engine of destruction. When the music stops, the silence is heavier than the noise. The barn doors open, and the expectation of a monstrous beast is subverted by the absurdity of the reality. 40 kobolds emerge, cheering, flanking their champion. But the champion is not a dragon or a giant. It is Ralph, a frenzied gerbil. The system's description of Ralph is a masterclass in dark humor and lore building. It frames the tiny rodent as a creature of pure, concentrated rage, holding a vendetta against humanity for the misconceptions regarding the Black Death. Ralph is a level 11 neighborhood boss, a cannibalistic survivor with a jaw that defies physics. The battle is chaos. Carl's explosives decimate the kobold entourage, but the tiny, furry missile that is Ralph survives, screaming with a mouth wide enough to swallow a man's head. The dungeon, however, rewards those who pay attention to its environmental storytelling. The dingoes, released from their cages by a dying kobold, do not attack Carl. They attack their tormentors. The one-eyed dingo, the recipient of Carl's earlier kindness, snaps Ralph out of the air and swallows him whole. It is an anticlimactic end to a boss fight, but a victory for lateral thinking. The daddy tax, as Donut calls it, referencing a bizarre habit of her former owner, comes due. The dingo, unable to contain the fury of the boss it ingested, explodes. The gerbil, battered but alive, rockets toward Carl. A single stomp ends the reign of Ralph. The dungeon groans, a visceral sound of disappointment from the AI, as if it feels cheated by the efficiency of the kill. The rewards, however, are significant. A key found on a dead kobold leads them to the menagerie, a reward room designed to grant a companion. The choice presented is a test of character. There are practical options: a self-replicating slime, a sturdy beetle thing, a powerful vesper. But Donut, driven by aesthetics and her own whimsical desires, locks onto the most useless-looking creature in the lineup, a Mongoliensis. It looks like a plucked chicken with a lizard's tail, a shivering, ugly thing with pink feathers. The description warns of a creature that is stubborn, hot-headed, and likely to eat its owner. It is a pet class mob starting at level 1, requiring a bonding process that seems nearly impossible. Carl wants the practical insect. Donut wants the dinosaur. In the end, the bond between Crawler and Cat dictates the choice. They take the creature. Donut names him Mongo. His first act of loyalty is to bite her directly on the nose. The grind. The subsequent days are a blur of repetitive violence and frustrating animal husbandry. The sleep-to-lore aspect here delves into the monotony that underscores the terror of the crawl. It isn't always boss fights. Often it is the slow, grinding effort to level up skills. Carl practices with his slingshot, a seemingly underpowered weapon that becomes crucial for grounding the flying vespers. Mongo proves to be a chaotic element. He is not a pet. He is a biological weapon with no trigger discipline. He teleports away, attacks indiscriminately, and requires constant management. The relationship between Donut and Mongo is a microcosm of parenthood gone wrong, filled with biting, scolding, and moments of baffling affection. They return to Mordecai for guidance. The changeling guide, usually cynical, seems revitalized by the presence of the pet, though he warns them of the time limit. If Mongo does not bond before the floor collapses, he will be left behind. This adds a new layer of pressure to their survival. It is no longer just about reaching the stairs. It is about saving this chaotic, biting chicken lizard. The breakthrough comes through violence. Mongo is a pack hunter. He doesn't need coddling. He needs to kill. By allowing the level 1 dinosaur to finish off weakened grubs, the bond begins to form. It is a grim nurturing, feeding the bloodlust of a prehistoric beast to earn its trust. When Mongo finally receives the Royal Steed title, signifying his bond to Princess Donut, it is a triumph earned in visceral gore. As the clock winds down to the final hours, the narrative takes a sharp turn into the mysterious. While waiting in the stairwell room, Carl sorts his inventory and discovers items he does not remember looting. A communications relay, a personal shield, and a pulse pistol, all manufactured by the Valte Corporation. The items are marked as illegal contraband by the system. The realization hits Carl when Agatha, the senile old woman from the nursing home, trundles into the room with her shopping cart. She is not what she seems. The cart, which Carl had briefly stashed in his inventory during a previous fight, was the source of the tech. Agatha's demeanor shifts. The facade of the confused elderly woman slips for a fraction of a second, replaced by a steely, knowing warning. "Them critters already know I'm here," she mutters. It is a chilling implication. There are factions at play within the dungeon that exist outside the binary of crawler versus system. Agatha is an anomaly, a glitch, or perhaps an infiltrator. The Valte Corporation represents a sci-fi element bleeding into this fantasy nightmare, suggesting that the game is being hacked or exploited from the inside. Carl, wise enough to know when he is out of his depth, lets her pass. The third floor beckons. The final ritual before descending is the interview with Odette. It is a return to the media circus. The studio lights, the invisible walls, the cheering audience. It is all a jarring juxtaposition to the grime and blood of the dungeon. They discuss the Pork Boy scandal. Carl attempts to defuse the situation, claiming he has no quarrel with the Skull Empire, yet he doubles down on his challenge to the maestro. It is a delicate dance of public relations. He must appear strong to his fans but not suicidal to the political powers watching from the stars. The audience, hungry for drama, chants the humiliating nickname, proving that in this universe clout is the only currency that matters. Odette, usually the consummate showwoman, offers a moment of genuine, albeit cryptic, advice. She warns them about the Valte Corporation, a parasitic aquatic species known for high-tech weaponry and debt collection. They are powerful enough to threaten the Borant system itself. Agatha's connection to them suggests a conspiracy of massive proportions. But the most immediate revelation concerns Mongo. As Donut chases the creature around the studio, Odette drops the final piece of lore for the second floor. Mongoliensis is the scientific classification. On Earth, in the pop culture lexicon that Carl understands, the creature has a different name: a velociraptor. The realization recontextualizes everything. The pink feathers, the beak, the size. It is all biologically accurate to what the dinosaur actually was, stripped of the Hollywood movie monster veneer. But the potential for violence remains. They are raising an apex predator. As Odette warns, the cute nibbles will soon turn into limb-shredding bites. The chapter ends on the precipice of the unknown. The third floor awaits, promising a complex system of race and class selection that will fundamentally alter their physiology and their future. Carl stands at the threshold, weary, carrying the weight of 1 trillion viewers, a viral sex tape scandal he didn't ask for, a dinosaur that wants to eat him, and the knowledge that the universe is far vast and more hostile than he ever imagined. The dungeon is not just a pit, it is a stage, and the curtain is about to rise on the next act. One thing remains certain: you will not break him.